Good evening. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Penny, after an introduction like that, I should just say thanks. That's it. She said it all. It was perfect. But I want to begin by thanking all of you for coming out. But if you would, and I appreciate the prayer, but I'm going to add to them. If we could pause for just a moment and offer up your prayers, not only to keep in mind the 9 brothers and sisters in Christ who were taken on Wednesday, but to offer a prayer, if you would, tonight, not just now, but as you go to bed, for their families, for their friends, for their fellow church members, for others in Charleston and in that community, in that state, and really for all of us in this country, because it's not just about them, it's really about all of us, and trying to find a way to bring this country together instead of looking at ways to pull us apart. So we just pause for a moment on that and lift up your prayers. Thank you. In fact, I don't know about all of you, but yesterday I didn't get to see it in person, but I read a little bit about the intake court hearing yesterday as they brought, and I won't say his name because I refuse to recognize his name, the person who perpetrated those crimes, other than to say it was racist, it was evil, it was something that I think we all condemn, not just his act, but his beliefs. But I got to tell you, as you saw that intake court where they were having their first initial action, looking at someone who could commit such an evil act, particularly, my goodness, after having been there apparently for an hour, sitting in that church as they were studying the Bible, listening to the Word of God. But as frustrating as that would be to be there, to see that, to see these family members, these friends, at least as I read it, I wasn't there to see it, but to see people talking about, even days after, about forgiveness and about hoping that God might reach his soul. And I got to tell you, one of my favorite verses was apropos yesterday for them, but it's been for me, and I'm sure many of you. It's in 2 Corinthians, in verse 12, or 12:9, I should say, where Paul is talking about the thorn in his body and thinking about the pain, and where Christ says to him there that my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And you just think, that's great to say, and it's been easy for me in much less difficult circumstances than what those family and friends went through yesterday, but they lived it. They showed us. They showed their community, they showed their state, they showed their country, they showed the world what it means to be a Christian. And for that, as awful as the week was, what a wonderful testimony to bring to all of us, and maybe an inspiration for us in even the darkest of times, to see that there's a way to minister and to witness. My father used to say that he and your father and others were ordained, but all of us are called to be ministers. And so that was a ripe opportunity there. I also want to say right off the bat, and it was a great chance to be with Penny and with Ralph, who I've known for a long time. We were swapping stories earlier about not only 5 years ago when Faith and Freedom Coalition first started putting things together in Wisconsin, and I wasn't even the governor back then, but way back, I said, I think I still have, when I run, I got different shirts. I still have one of my old Christian Coalition shirts from about 20 plus years ago. And Jenny Marshman, my good friend from Wisconsin, was one of our first leaders. And to think about when you had not only your leaders together at the reception, I got a chance to meet but a number of the young women, and thinking about those days at Marquette Students for Life and what an impact that had on us. I mentioned at the reception, but I met a young woman about a year ago at a Wisconsin Right to Life event. And it was so touching because when we were at Marquette, we helped with a crisis pregnancy program to help people going through difficult circumstances at an age that we were at going into college and right that time. And it was interesting. I met the daughter of someone who had been at college who'd given up her child for adoption, who now was in her 20s, who came back and reunited and were together at this Wisconsin Right to Life dinner. And she came up and introduced me because she knew we had been involved in Birthright, one of those crisis pregnant programs. I said, if there was ever a reason to doubt being pro-life, that moment made it all worthwhile. And it's moments like that. But I also want to say, not only think about faith, but about freedom to begin with. And I say this often, so I'm going to repeat it again tonight. You think about freedom. I'm going to talk about that for a fair amount tonight, but But I want to talk about it not just in our state, but where we need to head with this country. But when I think about freedom, the most important thing to think about right off the bat is freedom is endowed by our Creator, defined by our Constitution. I was just in Philadelphia earlier today, so saw right where those great founders worked on that. But ultimately, not just defined by the Constitution, but defended each and every day by the men and women who proudly wear the uniform of these United States. Before we go a step further, I would just ask this simple request. If you have served our country in the military, if you are serving perhaps even today, or if you're a family member of someone who has served our country, is serving today, would you stand up and properly be recognized? You know, we can talk a lot about freedom, but it doesn't happen without men and women like those that you saw standing and those that they represent and the families that they represent. And it was so great to be in Philadelphia earlier today. It's wonderful to be here, but to be in Philadelphia, to think about the founders, and I'm going to touch on that at the close here and tell you a little story about that as well. But I was thinking, particularly, we're thinking about all the challenges we face in this country today, particularly when it comes to believers. And you know, the Supreme Court decision that's coming up on marriage, and I firmly believe, as was mentioned, that marriage is defined between one man and one woman. I think that's something the states should decide and not the federal government, certainly not the U.S. Supreme Court. But I think far bigger than just that debate is the debate about religious freedom. It's interesting, having come from Philadelphia, seeing the statue of Penn, William Penn, and thinking about how he and many others like him came to this country to flee religious persecution. And sometimes there are some in the media and in this country who think it is freedom from religion. It is freedom of religion, not from it. That's important because our founders had a pretty good idea. They realized that no state, no body, no government entity should demand what religious faith you practice or what church you went to. But they also knew, in saying we weren't going to have the establishment of a state religion, of a state church, we should also protect the rights of people who believe to practice that faith. And in a society where it's important to respect the rights of others, part of that means respecting believers. Whether you're Christian or you're Jewish or any other faith tradition out there, that's what that was all about. And somehow I get frustrated thinking in today's society it only works for certain elements of society. No, it was meant for all of us out there. It was fundamental for all of us. I'm proud to be from a state where in the last few months, as there have been battles state by state, we have it inherently written into our state constitution. It protects religious freedom in our state's constitution. And so we haven't had some of the battles that other states have had along the way in the last year or so. But I would argue to you here today that it's not just in my state's constitution, it's in my country, in our country's constitution. It is something that defends the rights for every one of us to believe in what we want to believe, to worship where we want to worship, and to not have those rights be infringed by any form of government going forward. And so it's an honor to be here with you today because I know you share those beliefs, and I know there's a lot of challenges on the horizon. I want to tell you about some of the optimism I have for the future. You know, Penny did a pretty good job of listing some of the accomplishments. Sometimes people think it was all about taking on big government unions, and we did. We did that, but it really was much bigger than that. It was about taking on big government special interests and taking the power out of their hands and putting it in the hands of the hardworking taxpayers and the people they duly elect. That's really what it was all about. We not only changed our economy and made it better, we not only changed our fiscal standing. We were $3.6 billion in the hole when we came in. We've now had 4 years in a row with a balanced budget with surpluses. We'll be that going forward. We have the only pension system in the country that's fully funded. We have a rainy day fund that's literally 165 times bigger than we first took office. Those are pretty sound policies going forward. But we went beyond that. One of the things a lot of people don't know, even in my own state, is that we made changes that didn't just deal with collective bargaining. We said we're getting rid of seniority and tenure. In our state now, we can hire and fire based on merit. Yeah, we can hire and fire based on merit. We can pay based on performance. That means we can put the best and the brightest in our classrooms, and we can actually pay them to be there. I get tired of hearing that conservatives don't care about education. We do. We just put our faith in parents and in teachers in the classroom to actually put that money to use in the classroom, not in the education bureaucracy. That's why we reformed government at the public sector level. We expanded charter schools. We lifted the cap on choice schools and provided it statewide. And we enhanced the program for virtual and homeschool opportunities as well, because I actually trust parents to make the best decision if given the choices going forward. And as Penny mentioned, we defunded Planned Parenthood. We passed major pro-life legislation. We signed concealed carry and castle doctrine because I actually believe that law-abiding citizens should be able to protect themselves, their family, and their loved ones. We even did something so amazingly sensible. We said in our state it's now easy to vote but hard to cheat. We require a photo ID to vote in the state of Wisconsin. The reason I tell you all that's not to brag. Well, maybe not too much. It's a lot of work. And it's a good team. Rebecca Kleefisch, our Lieutenant Governor, our State Assembly, our State Senate. It was a great team effort. But I tell you that because, you see, Wisconsin is a state that hasn't gone Republican for president since our hero, Ronald Reagan, was last reelected in 1984. In fact, when Tonette and I, back in 2009, first thought about running for governor, we spent a lot of time thinking about it, talking about it, praying about it, because we knew how tough it would be, considering how difficult it is for a Republican to win in our state. But we knew we had two reasons why we had to. One's named Matthew, the other's named Alex. Those are my two sons. Tonette and I have two sons. We're proud of them. They're 19 and 20 now. They're traveling the country. They're all a part of this. But back then, we were worried that our state was heading in the wrong direction. And so we knew as parents what we had to do. We stepped up. We ran an election. We won the election. We didn't just win the election. We helped the State Assembly and State Senate go from all Democrat to all Republican majorities. And along the way in 2010, we didn't just do that. We did what we said we were going to do, and so shortly thereafter, about 100,000 protesters came into our capital. In fact, my apologies along the way. Many of you may not know this, but the Occupy Wall Street movement did not start in Manhattan and Wall Street. It started in Madison, Wisconsin, in our state capital. And then after they lost, they eventually went to New York. In fact, at one point, Rachel Duffy, the wife of Sean Duffy, one of our members of Congress, gave me one of my favorite bumper stickers. Because you remember, part of the reason why 100,000 protesters came into the Capitol was because 14 Senate Democrats in the minority actually left the state, went into Illinois to try and stop things. Eventually, we figured out a way to change things. We got the bill passed, and they eventually came back. And the Duffys gave me one of my favorite stickers. It says, "One walker beats 14 runners." But that wasn't enough, so they tried to take out our Supreme Court Justice, David Prosser. And then that wasn't enough. They tried to take out 6 members of the state Senate. And then that wasn't enough. They tried to take out Rebecca Kleefisch and I. And because of the help of many of you here, whether it was on the phones or with a $20 or $30 or $40 contribution, or some of you literally came, or thankfully so many of you mentioned to me here tonight, you actually prayed for us, which was the most potent thing you could do along the way on our path. Because of all that, we became the first governor and lieutenant governor in the country to win a recall election. Thank you. And the reason I tell you that is again, not to brag as much as to say thank you, because so many of you were a part of that, really across the country. We ended up having 300,000 donors in all 50 states. About 70% of our donors were people who gave us $75 or less. So it was a true grassroots effort, and you helped make it possible, and so thank you. But I also tell you that as a bit of inspiration going forward, because if we can do it in a state as blue as Wisconsin, there's no doubt we can do it anywhere in America, and with your help, with a House and a Senate and a new reform-minded president, we can do it right here in our nation's capital. And let me give you 3 quick reasons why that's important. They're really focused about 3 simple things: growth, reform, and safety. When I talk about growth, I said sometimes people in this town get a little confused. In fact, I like to come in and I'm going to leave tomorrow after I go to church. I'm going to leave because I can't stay too long in Washington. You see, I call it 68 square miles surrounded by reality. So I like to get back out to reality. So I'm glad to be here for a little bit. I love to see the monuments. It's a great reminder, but man, I got to get out of town. And so I love it. But sometimes people like the President and Hillary Clinton get confused. They think you grow the economy by growing Washington. You know, last year alone, 6 of the top 10 wealthiest counties in America, you know where they were? In and around Washington, D.C. That's where it's grown the last 5-6 years. I think the rest of us across America, we understand you grow the economy in cities and towns and villages all across America, that people create jobs, not the government. It's about time we get the government out of the way so the people of America can start putting more folks back to work again. In fact, some of the best ways to do it is get government out of the way. You know, rein in the regulations. Once and for all, repeal Obamacare and put patients and families back in charge of their health care decisions. Use the abundance of all the different power and energy supplies we have here in this country and in this continent to help literally fuel the economy going forward. And I even believe we should reform the tax code and lower the burden, not just on individuals, but on job creators, so that more American jobs can come back from overseas to put more of our fellow Americans back to work. Now, sometimes people, you know, some of the liberals in my capital, I would imagine in this capital, get a little confused and they think, well, wait a minute. You know, why are you so obsessed with lowering the tax burden on hardworking people out there? I'm proud to say in Wisconsin, we've cut the burden by $2 billion on individual rates, on employer rates. Most importantly, we lowered property taxes, so much so they're lower today than they were 4 years ago. So people often wonder why I obsess with that. I said I got a simple story to tell you why. On February 6th of this year, Tonette and I celebrated our 22nd wedding anniversary. Thanks. Really, you should clap for her for putting up with me for 22 years now. But thank you. She'd ask for even more claps if she was here right now. But I learned a critical thing not long after I was married. In fact, I made a critical mistake right off the bat. I went to a place called Kohl's Department Store, and I bought something for the price it was marked at. Now, I've learned over the years, if I'm going to go buy a shirt, maybe like the one I'm wearing, I go to Kohl's and I go to the rack that says it was $29.99 and now it's $19.99. And then I get the little insert from the Sunday newspaper that gets me another 15 or 20% off. Or maybe if I remember the flyer from back home that got me 15 or 20, or really, if I'm lucky, it gave me 30% off on that coupon. And then I take that up to the front and they start ringing it up, and then Tonette swoops into her purse, pulls out some of that Kohl's cash, and next thing you know, they ring it up and they tell me they're paying me to buy the shirt. Right? Well, not quite. But it kind of feels like it, right? Yeah. So how does a company like that make money? They make it off of volume, right? They make it off of volume. They could sell you those shirts at $29.99, or they could reduce the price, broaden the base, and make more money off of volume. Well, that's how I think about your money, the taxpayers' money. Few of you could pay those higher rates, but wouldn't it be nice if all of us saw our rates go down and the base be broadened, more people be put to work? Back in the 80s, we used to call it the Laffer curve because of my friend Art Laffer. Today, with all due respect to Art, I call it the Kohl's curve because that's really what it's all about. And as a part of that, we don't just level things off. We start to fix things like the marriage penalty. So we're not just fixing the tax code. We're encouraging through our policies, not discouraging marriage, because marriage not just, yeah. Because we know it's not only biblically sound, morally sound, we know it's empirically sound. That the data shows us that if you have intact families, if you have a mother and father involved in raising a son or a daughter or their children, we just know the data shows it's not just in our hearts, we can prove it. Children are much better off. They're much more likely to finish their school, get a great education, go on to get a job. So it's a great thing for both moral as well as economic reasons going forward. So that's point one, growth. Secondly, though, I think the second thing I want to talk about for a moment is reform. Now, again, in Washington here, you got people like the President, Hillary Clinton, who somehow believe the measure of success in government is how many people are dependent in the government. Right? Medicaid, food stamps, unemployment, that's their measure. I think for the rest of us, our measure of success should be just the opposite. Our measure of success should be how many people are no longer dependent on the government. See, that's the difference. Sometimes there are some in the media who think that means we want to push people out on their own into the cold. No, we understand that true freedom and prosperity do not come from the mighty hand of the government. They come from empowering people to live their own lives and control their own destinies through the dignity that is born of work. Of work. I got to tell you, when I was a kid, my first job was washing dishes at the Countryside Restaurant. Not long after that, I went up to the big time. In high school, I started flipping hamburgers at McDonald's. In fact, little known story, my friend Paul Ryan grew up about 15 miles down the road from me. He was flipping burgers in Janesville when I was flipping them in Delavan. The only difference is his manager actually told him he had to flip hamburgers in the back because he didn't have the interpersonal skills to work the front cash register. It's true. Kid him about that if you see him. But I got to tell you, along the way, thinking about growing up in that small town, my dad, as Penny mentioned, was a small-town preacher at the First Baptist Church. My mom worked part-time as a secretary and bookkeeper for a men's clothing store there in downtown Delavan and raised my brother and I. My grandparents, on my mom's side, were farmers that didn't have indoor plumbing until my mom went off to junior high school. My dad's dad, my Grandpa Walker, was a machinist for 42 years at Barbara Coleman. When I look back at my life and that of my brother and I realize we didn't inherit fame or fortune from our family. What we got was the belief that if you work hard and you play by the rules, you can do and be anything you want. That's the American dream. We need to be the ones who champion that. I mean, think about that. Think about it. It's one of those things that's great to challenge people when they think about this, because government entitlement's not the answer. It's about helping people get the skills and the education, the qualifications they need to succeed, and then go out and let them do it on their own. I don't know about you, but when I grew up in school, not a one of my classmates ever said to me, "Hey, Scott, someday when I grow up, I want to become dependent in the government." Nobody signed my yearbook, "Scott, good luck becoming a dependent in the government." And along the way, I met some really amazing people, many of whom who've come here from other places legally from around the world. And many of the people I've been blessed to meet will tell me, to a person, the reason they came to America was not to become dependent in the government. The reason they came here was because it was one of the few places left in the world where it didn't matter what your parents did for a living, didn't matter what class you were born into. In America, you can do and be anything you want. The opportunity is equal for all of us, but the outcome should still be up to each and every one of us. If you don't remember anything else tonight, remember this. There's a reason why in America we take a day off in a few weeks to celebrate the 4th of July and not the 15th of April, because in America we celebrate our independence from the government, not our dependence on it. And the third thing I want to talk to you about for just a moment or two is about safety. We say, what are you talking about, safety? What are you talking about, safety? What does that mean? Some people here in Washington call it national security. I call it safety. You see, when I see a video of a Jordanian pilot burned alive in a cage, when I see Christians from Egypt and other places around the world who are beheaded because of their faith, that's not something you read about. That's something you feel. You feel it in your heart and your soul. And I got to tell you, even though as a governor I don't deal with this issue day in and day out, it has risen to the top of my list of priorities. I cannot tell you how frustrated I am with this president and this administration. We've got a president who drew a line in the sand and allowed it to be crossed. Yeah. We've got a president who just in the last year called ISIS the JV squad, who calls Yemen a success story, who calls Iran a place we can do business with. I don't know about all of you, but I remember as a kid, in front of our house, in front of that parsonage you were talking about, in front of our house back in the late 70s, my brother and I tied yellow ribbons around the tree in front of our house because my friend Kevin Hermaning, who now lives in Wausau, Wisconsin, was the youngest Marine held hostage there. They held Americans hostage for 444 days. Iran is not a place we should be doing business with. You know, I think about how mixed up this Obama-Clinton doctrine is when it comes to foreign policy. We got a president who earlier this year at the graduation ceremony for the Coast Guard Academy, stood up and actually told the graduates that the #1 threat to the military in the world today is global warming. Well, I got a message for you, Mr. President. The #1 threat to the military, the #1 threat to America, the #1 threat to the world is radical Islamic terrorism, and it's about time we do something about it. We need a president in this country who understands that Israel is actually an ally and starts treating her as such. And we need to send a message once and for all that we need a leader in this country who's going to have the courage to look the American people in the eye and tell them something that might not be easy to say. You see, it's not going to take a day or a week or even a month. But the enemy we face in the world today is not like the one we grew up in the Cold War, where containment was enough. Our enemy today is like a virus. And if we don't take it out, it's going to take us out. We need someone who's got the courage to say that on behalf of your children and mine, I'd rather take the fight to them instead of wait till they bring the fight to us. And so there's a lot at stake in this next election. Not just in the election, but in the choices that we make. You know, do we continue a third term of this president's failed policies by electing Hillary Clinton, who, particularly when it comes to foreign policy, has been intricately involved in these horrible policies we just talked about? Or do we elect not just a Republican, but ideally a Republican who can actually get things done? And I would ask you to consider this for just a moment. We have arguably, I think, one of the best fields that Republicans have had for president since 1980, right? And we haven't made an announcement yet, but we just formed 2 days ago what they call a Testing the Waters Committee. And if you're interested, you can go to scottwalker.com and get more details. But I got to tell you, if we were to get in, I think we could offer something unique. You see, there's a lot of good people, many of whom are good friends of mine. But there's really two groups out there. There are fighters, many of whom work in this Capitol. There are fighters who are fighting the good fight, but honestly, they haven't won any of those major fights yet. And there's another group of people who are really good at winning elections, and they've been elected and reelected, but they don't consistently take on those tough fights. I would argue if we were to throw our hat in the ring, what would make us unique is that we do both. We fight the good fight, and we win those fights over and over and over again. And they've made the people of our state better because of it. And I think in America, that's not just what Republicans want. That's not just what conservatives want. I think Americans want someone who in the White House will wake up every day figuring out how are we going to fight and win for the hard-working American people. I think that's what we need going forward. And so I just want to end with this little bit of optimism, because as challenging as these times are, as difficult these choices will be made in the next year and a half or so, I'm optimistic about the future. I'm an optimist. I love America. We are a can-do country. Fortunately, we've had a can't-get-it-done government the last few years, but we are a can-do country. And I know that with the right leadership, we can make America great again. And I know it not just because of what we've done in our state, but many of my friends around the country have done similar things in the states that you live in. And so I know the states are an immediate source of optimism for the future. But I want to end just with this. It comes from related to where I just came from in Philadelphia. See, what makes me optimistic about the future of this country is because of our history, and I'm reminded of that by where I came from earlier today, Philadelphia. I mentioned as a small kid and through high school, I grew up in Delavan. Small town, Dad's a preacher. We never had a chance to make it out to Philadelphia. And so that was tough because as a kid, I loved history. maybe I'm a little bit of a geek, but I thought of our founders as bigger than life, like superheroes. And so later, after Tanette and I were married, we got a chance one year to go out to Philadelphia. And so here I was, all pumped up and excited. I was ready to see where the superheroes worked. And we got up early in the morning, we went out the National Park Service, went by the Liberty Bell, and then made our way into Independence Hall. The sun was coming up. I was ready to be blown away. We got in the hall, and as many of you have been there know, it's literally not much bigger than the dais that we're on right now. I looked at the chairs, looked at the desk, and it dawned on me. These were ordinary people. These were ordinary people who did something extraordinary. You see, they didn't just risk their political careers. They didn't just risk their business ventures. These were patriots who risked their lives for the freedoms we hold dear today. Ladies and gentlemen here tonight, I would tell you that moments like that remind me, and I hope they inspire you as well, to know that what has made America great, what has made us exceptional, what has made us the greatest country in the history of the world has been all throughout our nation's history. In times of crisis, be it economic or fiscal, be it military or spiritual, what has made America amazing has been all throughout those times. There have been men and women of courage who've been willing to think more about the future of their children and their grandchildren than they thought about their own political futures. I would contend to you now, this is one of those moments. This is one of those times in American history. This is the moment and opportunity when we can look back and tell future generations, we were there. We heeded the call. We did what was required to make America great again. I have every confidence, with your help, the help of the American people, and the good fortune of the God Almighty above us, we will make America great again. Thank you so much for coming out here tonight. Thanks for the chance to share with you.